Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. This is Jody.
I'm Elliot.
And this is our 100th episode.
You do that so much more melodically than I ever could. I'm jealous.
Quite all right. And we have a lot to get into today, so we're going to make this fast. Two little celebratory things about this episode. We've talked a fair amount about our little bonus episode we have that was sort of blush-worthy, at least a little bit. I don't want to overblow that and then people be disappointed that it's not not terribly raunchy. Yeah. But we're actually going to play a little clip of it. So here's my story. And I'm already laughing. Yeah. Wow. Okay. So yesterday I was driving in the car with my son, my 14-year-old son, by the way. So that makes us even funnier. And we were listening to whatever radio station he had put on. It was their morning show and they're like bantering around. And they had done this thing where it was one time I was so broke And then they had people either tweeting or Facebooking or calling in or whatever.
Right.
And so then one of the guys goes, oh, I think we have the winner here. We've got Rebecca on the line. And she says, one time I was so broke, I sold my used panties.
That's an Orange is the New Black situation.
Oh, okay, so they actually mentioned that later. I don't know. I haven't seen this season or whatever. So okay, now you're going to ruin the punchline of my story,
That's what I'm
which is that I was and so they of course are like, what is that? Oh my God, that's a thing. Like, how do you do that? Like Craigslist? And she goes, no, there's actually like a website for it. And they're like, okay, come on, we weren't intending to like interview people, but we have to ask you questions. So like, how does it work? Like, how much do you typically get for? Like, how does this work? And she goes, well, I just wear them for a day and then I like mail them out. And he goes, well, what is like a typical pair of panties go for? And she's like, well, typically like $45-$50.
Really?
And in my mind, I'm like, times 30, that's like $1,500 a month.
Yeah. And mom and dad must be so proud.
So proud. And I'm like,
a
a pair of panties for $5, So, okay. But here's, so and then I Google it and I find it. And I'm like, sure enough, there's this, I can't remember what it's not. I'll have to look it up.
There's a search history you're going to have to delete.
In this. Oh, if only it stopped there being that bad. But that doesn't even compare. So I looked it up and it's not called Panty Send, but it's called something like that. I can't remember. No, whatever, it doesn't matter. And it's a whole thing. And here's where I was like, I want to bring this up as an outlet. So I vaguely considered like signing up as a member of the site for this purpose.
Okay. I
am curious, like, how does one differentiate your panties? Like why one pair over another? Is it like by person? Is it by like the type? Apparently the type of panty doesn't necessarily matter. I'm just fascinated
really? The type doesn't matter.
Well, see, I don't know. And that's what I'm really curious about. I will add one other odd detail when I was doing this research. Important research, is that apparently it's a huge thing in Japan and there are actually vending machines.
No.
Yeah, vending machines.
Really?
For worn panties. And there's all sorts of instructions on like, for the best customer experience, ship them in a Ziploc bag. It gets into quite detail of like how to really create a great used panty experience.
Okay, so
I know, right? I mean, like
I have questions.
I know, but that's actually what I love about this story is so it does not surprise me at all that there are people out there who would buy used panties and that there are people who would sell used panties.
Of course.
Whatever. That list is a long list of like people who will do X and people who will do Y.
Right.
That there is actually an organized industry with best practices and guidelines and structures. There's a whole thing about like if you're a seller, how to do it safely and, tips and tricks and like a marketing plan. Plan. I know.
Wait. Go back. I can't let this go by. I think the use of the word tricks somehow
CKS, not X.
Oh, okay.
There's
all
not
right.
an X.
So somehow has to be emphasized.
It's tricks.
But I'm curious. Okay, so I have a number of questions right off the bat.
Me too.
Some of the questions.
You realize this ends with us signing up for membership so we can see how it works.
So some of my questions are.
And one of us getting divorced.
What is the research that shows you the best place to put those vending machines? I mean, do people walk out of, let's say, their commute home on the subway? Is that really when you're hitting them at the right time for that product?
I had the same thought. Where are these vending machines? Like,
where are they?
Because when I stand in front of a vending machine, I'm like, do I want cookies or chips? Or, I wonder if there's anything healthy in there. I stand there for a while and make my decision.
Yeah.
does one stand in front of a panty vending machine? If you like what you hear, you can pick that up either by going to shmsbonus.com, or you can just text the word story to 345-345 and you will get what you need to get that whole episode. It's very entertaining. It's one of my favorites. And that's it. So in our, Elliot tells a story today, as we discussed, that talks about ritual and celebrating milestones. It's a really lovely story, not where I thought you were going to go with a story on ritual, but I really like where it took us. So.
Yes, but we have a chance to take it wherever you think it might take us, because this, as you all know, is our first two-parter episode. So we start with this story that I'm going to tell in just a minute, and our discussion is paused appropriately, I think, to leave room for the voices that I think are just as, if not more important than ours.
Oh, definitely more important than ours.
Definitely more important than ours.
Which, hint, hint, is yours. So if you want to contribute your thoughts and be part of this second part of the episode, you can either catch us on Facebook in the group or on our Facebook page or Messenger. You can email talk to us at sohere'smystory.com, or you can also call or text our story line at 410-205-6055.
And if you want to record a little snippet, you will actually get to hear what your voice sounds like coming through iTunes. So here's my story, and I'll warn you that in law, we would call this double hearsay, because it's really not a story that happened to me, and the source of what I'm about to tell you doesn't even come from the person who it actually happened to. It came from a book.
Okay.
I'll clarify.
Did you read it on a bathroom wall somewhere?
Yes, it was. Picked it up in the subway. But no, this happened to a good friend of mine, and it comes from a very deeply emotional place. She was married for a long time, raised two wonderful kids into adulthood, and there came a time that her husband passed away, and she was devastated by this. Yeah. And I know her well, and I know that she, worked her way through it, and she moved on, but she was still very much in the marriage, even though he wasn't physically present. But, she was living life, and it came to a point where she decided that, she did want to think about kind of maybe the possibility that she could date again. She could be with somebody else. Mm-hmm. And as you might imagine, with that, and certainly with her, came some degree of guilt, because she wanted to honor her own life while still honoring the marriage. And I think it's difficult. And I think just putting myself in her place and listening to what she was saying, part of her felt that she was either being selfish or betraying the marriage or what have you. And I asked her when we were having lunch, I said, well, what happened? Because I know that she had started to go out a little bit. And she said, well, a friend of mine brought this book to my attention, and here's where I really wish I knew what book it was, and I'll take a look, see if I can find it. But
before we send Christy on a wild goose chase,
right?
Christy, go find the book.
She comes back. It's not a book. It was a Marvel adventure movie or whatever it was. But anyway, what wound up happening was
in the book,
mm-hmm. and then in real life for my friend. My friend got a hold of her priest, and they together arranged a ceremony. To which she invited her friends and her grown children and some relatives. And the ceremony was intended to honor the marriage, to show in a very real, tangible way that she had honored her vows completely, till death do us part. And at the end, or certainly during the culmination of the ceremony, she removed her wedding ring. And she wore it as a necklace, or she made it into another piece of jewelry, but she was no longer wearing the ring on her ring finger because she had honored her marriage. Yeah. And for her, the ceremony was very powerful because it brought some closure, not to the emotional connection she felt with her husband,
of course,
but it brought some closure so that she felt that she did honor the marriage, as she, of course, did. And it gave her permission, not through conversation with friends or conversation with children or even therapy, but through the ritual. Right. It gave her permission to move forward.
It gave her the pathway to do that.
Correct. Yeah. It gave her the pathway to move forward. And I was really struck by that because first of all, it wasn't a normal ritual that you normally hear about. You have birthday parties and you might have a retirement dinner and you might have, whatever it is. But it was, the path for her was marked by a ritual that had to be created in order to give herself permission to move on. And I see that, I know that in this, our 100th episode, we've been talking about ritual in business. And so as you and I sometimes do, we were batting around, well, what about, do you have stories about ritual or this happened or that happened? And we each have some things to say about it in a business context. But this to me was the most powerful created ritual that I knew about, as opposed to something you always do, like, well, Christmas or.
Well, I think that's because while ritual and whether it be celebration rituals or rituals, I mean, this was also a celebration, but on a more somber note. Ritual I don't know if it's by definition, but by common usage means repeated. Typically, it's something that happens every time something happens. But there is something that ultimately, to me, there's a fine line for some things between ritual and habit. You sort of like check the boxes of Christmas or check the boxes of Easter or birthday parties or whatever. Whereas this one, because it was created so intentionally, I really think you feel the pause of it. You feel the weight with which that punctuation of that it puts in the space, so that creates a definitive line between before and after, in the same way that marriage does. It creates these like before this moment, after this moment. And these dots in, again, we keep coming back to the word punctuation, like I love that idea of those things being the punctuation marks in life, so that it's not one big run-on sentence that's just a blur, right?
And you hear people saying that, geez, this year went by so fast. Is it November already? Is it this? It went by so fast. And what I've read and what I find to be true is that a lot of times that they go by faster when there's no dot. There's no space. There's no pause. But if there was, well, you had this friend's wedding here and you had this thing happen there and you had the other thing, whatever, all of a sudden you remember this year because you can judge them by the spaces before, after, and between.
Well, it's funny because if we stick with the sort of metaphor of punctuation marks for a second, there was no period at the end of the sentence of her wedding for her. It was just this ... that kind of went on ad infinitum. So that's so interesting. I think I'm quite fascinated by this issue, by this topic of like milestones and rituals and celebrating milestones. It all came up because Chris in the Facebook group said, it's your 100th episode. Why not do an episode on celebrating milestones and why we're so bad at celebrating milestones as they come up? And I think I've mentioned this before, hysterically, we put out several calls, both during episodes as well as in social media and whatnot, for people to share, how they celebrate their milestones and their wins and their
Right. It was
just like pieces along the way.
Yeah. We said, hey, Chris thinks we're really bad at celebrating milestones. So chime in with your best way to celebrate milestones.
And crickets. And that's not just because of lack of engagement. I mean, normally we ask a question, we get answers, and there were, so I know people celebrate some milestones out there, but I think overall it is a really, I think we just have this really bad habit of working incredibly hard to achieve some goal or to get to some point or win something. And then the second that win shows up, we blur through to the next thing. I mean, it'd almost be like summiting Everest, and you get to the top and without even standing there for some substantial amount of time and looking around and taking pictures, being like, all right, back down, guys. What are we doing next?
Well, I feel that, I mean, in our firm. So in March, we had a really large trial, and that large trial took a lot of effort from our entire team. And it was exhausting. And, just weekends and late nights. We were here till midnight certain times. It was exhausting. We went through the trial. We had a great result. We came back. And then Monday, we're just like, hey, okay, well, I'll see you tomorrow. And we just came back in. And I felt it was hollow somehow.
Yeah.
Because then when we came back, literally we're like, oh, well, because we came back before 5 o'clock because we got our result in the middle of the day. We drove back here and we're like, well, you know what? I might answer a few emails, and then, I'm just going to go home because I've had it. But that's stopping is not the same as bringing closure or actually recognizing what just happened.
Or the power of coming together and talking it through or celebrating it or just even acknowledging it. I mean, I think there's levels to it. There's even noticing that it's our 100. So here's a really funny thing. This may sound a little like weird because it should be inherent in it. But until Chris said, well, it is a milestone. Why don't you do an episode on celebrating milestones?
Yeah.
I'm the one who said it's our 100th episode. What should we do that's fun? I wasn't even thinking of it as a milestone.
Right. It was just a number. And then Chris said,
well, it was a number and it was a good idea. It was a good opportunity to create a little bit of excitement around, hey, it's our 100th episode. What should we do about it? But even I wasn't thinking of it as a milestone. Like, hey, we've done 100 episodes. That's a thing.
Well, and I confess I'm a little bit embarrassed now because I got you a gift. And
no, you didn't. but
I should have.
You could say you did, but it's fine. But what we haven't done though is we haven't talked about any way to celebrate this or any other milestone. Like we literally haven't done any except our birthday. We do our birthday every year.
We do our birthdays, and
it's the same birthday.
I did get a face cake.
That's true. We do have a face cake for the birthday, but I think the part of, I don't know, I go back and forth on this because people don't even, they don't even celebrate the great big wins a lot of times. They'll just go right back into business. And I had a client who the entire time I worked with him for years and years and years and years, everything was focused on this, like, one day I'll be the kind of entrepreneur who can build a company to the point that someone else will buy it. And this isn't even in the tech startup world. Like this is like,
so that's kind of how he measured his success. He's made it.
That's when he would know that he was like, that to him, that was just, and even he acknowledged that not that it was arbitrary, but that it was, whatever. For him, that felt like, I will feel like the man I want to be if I can be that kind, that will make sort of like any, like whether somebody does it around body image or any kind of success factor, like then I'll know that I have arrived at the man I want to be. And that day did come. And
when he sold his business,
he did sell his business. And I talked to him the next day and he was at work doing it was just a normal old day. Like there was and it had just been this Everest.
And that had been the focus
everything.
Of years.
It wasn't like we were working on that, but it was always this if then statement. And I had joked with him for years that if there wasn't a before and after, if all the conversations didn't change come that day, that we were going to try it my way instead, which is a whole other conversation.
So you got an I told you so out of it. So that was
a little bit. And it wasn't that black or white. It was a little more nuanced than that. But still, it was such a glaring example of how easy it is to go after something and then just sort of miss the moment of the arrival. And I think the reverse is true. I mean, not the reverse. The same is true in reverse situations. Although I understand the drive to keep on moving through much faster, when something not great happens, like losing a job or, those kind of, there's this real almost urge to move on to the next thing really fast versus, taking that pause and looking into it. But
right. Well, I think there is the get back on the horse thing.
Sure.
So if you move really fast, it almost didn't happen. If I get another job, it almost wasn't it was like I almost wasn't fired.
Which I would buy into if we only did it when we were trying to escape a yucky feeling. But we do it when we get to the really good spot too. That's the part that I think is fascinating. We do it for the big wins. We skip right over the small wins. I mean, nobody celebrates the the little things.
But I think that what's interesting to me, because I'm glad you brought up the small wins, because the small wins are really interesting in that we are set up to celebrate them on a personal level, just not on a business level. And here's what I mean. So if you go into Weight Watchers or one of those places, or even one of the apps, and you want to lose 60 pounds, they don't celebrate it when you go from 59 to 60 pounds lost. They will celebrate it when you've lost 5 pounds or you've had this good week or whatever it is, but they don't set it up for 60. Same thing if you have one of these health apps that, even come with the Apple Watch or whatever that talk about calories and exercise minutes. They have awards built in that might be, hey, you exercised for 30 minutes a day every day for a week.
Right.
Or even at the end of the day, you closed your rings this week and the little confetti comes off. So I think that there are a lot of things in our personal lives that are actually being built to celebrate the small wins, but I don't see that much in business, where I think it's incredibly important.
In fact, I sometimes hear what I feel like is a pretty backwards or counterintuitive or just non-effective kind of mentality around that. Sometimes I do hear leaders sometimes talk almost as if they imagine that if you celebrate the little things along the way that, and this is over dramatizing just to kind of make the point, because of course it's more nuanced than this, but that if you celebrate the little things along the way, that you're somehow letting people off the hook for, like, if you sort of take the whip away, if you're not whooshing along to drive forward. And I'm always a little perplexed by that, because I don't, that's not typically how human psyches work, but I have heard that.
Yeah. And you also see that, a lot of times companies, and I hear this from owners all the time, the only thing that they're setting up to celebrate are the organizational goals. So for example, if I said, we're going to have a celebration if we hit, pick a number, 2 million in revenue. Well, they might identify, the individuals might identify with that, but I don't know that my secretary is really going to identify with that, because she doesn't bill time. She doesn't go out and get clients. She doesn't bill time. And so she might be happy that, hey, if we hit that number, then presumably her paychecks won't bounce. And that's really good. But she doesn't contribute to it. So I don't know that it would feel like a personal victory for her. So a lot of times businesses celebrate the organizational, but they don't celebrate the personal goals.
Well, I think part of it, maybe we're almost looking at the wrong thing here. It's almost backing it up to notice what milestones even are there. But before we even talk about celebrating them or not, I think milestones are easy to recognize on things like sales teams,
right?
Or if it's the marketing team's job to get you shortlisted so you get the interview. Like those are very clear wins. Yep. I don't know exactly, like, what are the milestones? Well, I guess on the accounting team, it could be that we got month end close. I mean, like there are things, but I think you have to take a step back. And the first question is, what are the milestones of progress? And like, where are we moving forward? And where is, I even said progress, but sometimes it's just the things that aren't necessarily progress, but are just the ongoing work of moving towards something. Yeah.
So I really look at it. I always use the in terms of progress, how are we better on 12/31 than we were on January 1st? And even for anybody, even for the secretary or somebody, like you said, not sales. Well, I did $1 million worth of sales, but something that's not as easily quantifiable. How are we better on December 31st than we were on January 1st? But the way I look at ritual through that, when we get back to the punctuation, we get back to the pauses, a lot of times I won't remember that something took place in, pick a year, 2016. What I'll measure it by is, wait a minute, isn't that when we moved into our new office? When was it? So there are things that break from the norm.
Right.
And so
I know somebody would ask me about something and I'll be like, okay, what grounding event can I point to? Like okay, I remember that happened in our new office. So it had to have been after this time, or like,
right. So, we moved to the new office, which was something that was a business decision that kind of thrust upon us. But what's interesting to me is, in the year 2023, is there anything that I'm going to look back on that happened in 2019 and say, oh, that's when X happened? 2019 is when ... And other than, we have the successful transaction and this trial and these clients came in, but that's kind of business as usual. And it's sad for me. And this is, getting back to Chris's question about, why are we so bad at celebrating rituals? And part of it is, are we bad at recognizing when the rituals should be established? I can't think of anything that in 2023, I would look back and say, oh, the 2019, that was the year that
we had our 100th episode.
Yes, that we had our 100th episode.
Oh, it's sort of, because, if you think about it, I think sometimes there's, maybe this is part of it. The people imagine milestones have to be somehow anointed from on high, or like have some sort of higher, I don't even know what I'm saying here exactly, but like not higher purpose, but nothing that's going on deserves milestone, whatever. Yeah, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But I think, there's nothing about the 100th episode. Yeah. Is it sponge worthy? Is it milestone worthy? 100, there's nothing different technically about this episode than the last episode. There's nothing the fact that we're celebrating the 100th episode is kind of arbitrary. Right? I mean, somewhat. I mean, it's a big number, but...
No, I see what you're saying. It is, it seems like it should be significant, but it's not like in the podcast world we're now a bronze, where we've attained
nothing changes.
Nothing changes. But it was funny when you said, I said, there's nothing in 2019 that I look back on. 2019 was the year that ... And so you said, well, that we celebrate our 100th episode. And here's where the distinction is, though. It's not memorable because we recorded our 100th episode. It would be memorable if we celebrated our 100th episode,
which we have not yet done.
Which we have not done.
This is the point. This is why, because the things go, the milestones go by, they're like mile markers on the interstate. The mile markers swoosh by, whether you acknowledge them or not. And by somehow taking an exit ramp and noticing that milestone, or like somehow we apparently have to go for oysters or something to celebrate our 100th episode. So that then it will have significance. But if you don't create that pause, if you don't give it significance, then it just becomes part of the blur.
That's exactly right. And so I think we create a pause.
Do we have a ...
Yes, there's a ... okay. Which means that I think that, and we've talked about this, so this is going to be part 1.
Okay.
This discussion is part 1.
100th episode, part 1?
Yes, and there will be a 100th episode, part 2.
Okay, I'm not going to jump into whether that counts as episode 101, or we'll figure that out later.
It's a whole different thing. But so one of the ways that we will mark our 100th episode is this is going to be our first 2-parter.
Okay.
And in between, what's going to characterize part 2, I hope, is there's going to be an answer from our community, hopefully multiple answers from our community, to Chris's question, to how we celebrate, bad ways to celebrate, what the small wins are, what the large wins are in your industry, and what your thoughts are, because I think part 2 is your story.
And we can update on how we celebrated.
Exactly.
Because then we will have celebrated in 2019.
Yes, we will. So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories.
You
can find links to that group, as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email, and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us.
Which
is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.